very much to all of our speakers tonight. We're going to move on with our agenda now to item L1 under new business, which is the final report, the review of the police presence and programs. And tonight we do have the consultant that worked for the board on this. Mr. Neil Price is here to walk us through the report.
Could I just ask if Superintendent Korbach, who's on the phone, is going to introduce this, or are we just going right to the report? Pardon?
Introduce Neil Price, co-founder and executive director of Logical Outcomes. As you can see from the report that was compiled over the last several months on police presence and programs in schools, Logical Outcome was the consultancy group that conducted the consultation, conducted the survey, and provided the final report. So Neil is here tonight to talk through the process, the methodology, the findings, and the recommendations from the report. So thank you, Neil, and welcome.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. Good evening. Thanks to everyone for having me here. My name is Neil Price. I'm
now exiting.
That's okay. I'm the executive director of Logical Outcomes. We are a nonprofit consultancy. We like to stress that because our mission really is to help organizations improve their effectiveness. We have a deep interest in social service work. We have a deep interest in the public good. And so a lot of our work is really about engaging communities, gathering information and presenting our findings. So today I'm just going to give you an overview of the report that has been submitted to the board, and I hope to leave some time if there's any questions. So first, let me just talk a little bit about the scope of the review. The review looked at in-school programs and the presence of police officers, which is what you've heard. So we looked at the SRO programs or initiatives. We looked at VIP, BRAD. But I want to stress that our goal was not to go into those programs and assess how they're designed, how they're delivered. What we're interested in is whether the stated outcomes of those programs are having their desired impact or their desired effect in schools, namely with students. One of the limitations that we had for this review, of course, was...
Participants are waiting in the lobby. To admit all participants in the lobby...
It's okay. That's okay. One of the limitations we had was the fact that this work came on the heels of a pandemic. And so we had an intentional focus on secondary school students because we recognize, looking at programs that they would have encountered in grade 6, grade 9, we simply didn't have enough students who would have had those experiences. So we really focused on secondary students who would have had some exposure to some of the programs we were looking at. Our methods and approaches included an extensive literature review looking at this issue of police in schools. We spoke to 30 individuals through in-depth interviews. We conducted 4 focus groups with students, and we conducted 2 surveys with students and community. The student survey received, I don't have the end number here, but the student survey had close to 300 respondents, so not an insignificant number, and the community survey had an enormous response. I believe the number was up to 3,000 respondents informed that survey. We took a youth-centered approach by inviting students to participate in our process as youth researchers. So they helped us develop some of our research questions. They helped us look at our findings when they came in on a preliminary basis. And we hope that what that signaled was that their perspective was essential, and that this is about them essentially, and that they should be involved. We took a trauma-informed approach, emphasizing universal design and learning principles, and we tried to center student voices. And as you heard from speakers earlier, we prioritize the experiences and opinions of racialized and marginalized identities, given that in this subject matter, those are groups that have historically had challenging relationships with police, as well as with schools. So our first step was to interview police and staff with respect to their experiences of these programs. And some of what we heard was, these programs or these initiatives help with relationship building and mentorship. We heard that there's opportunities for learning through encounters with police. We heard about these initiatives or programs giving police the opportunity to present a positive image around policing. We heard about sorry, there's a typo there. That's breaking down barriers. We heard about police seeing these encounters, these engagements as opportunities to maintain order in school in some instances, and sometimes provide mediation when there's conflict. And we also heard from some police officers that at times decisions are made to look at alternative resolutions rather than those that lead to arrests or detainment of students. I do want to stress, though, that the stated outcomes of, for example, VIP, self-esteem, confidence building, developing respect for others, etc., were the kinds of outcomes that we were asking whether or not students felt that that's what those programs were about. That's what they were experiencing or gaining from those programs. Several interview participants responded to this by saying that those programs lack a clear mandate. So it's not entirely clear to members of the community why the SRO program exists. We heard from staff, parents, and students say that this was not clearly articulated. And although feedback on some SRO presentations was positive, we did hear some positive comments about those programs. Several respondents pointed out that the SROs are not trained as educators, and that police approaches to engaging and educating children and youth are not therefore grounded in evidence or trauma-informed approaches. Respondents also shared that in an education school environment, subject matters around safety, around using substances, alcohol, these are topics that are better to be led by educators in collaboration with professionals, which might, when the opportunity or the topic calls for involvement of police, there's an opportunity to see police as partners. We also explored asking staff and students with experience of these programs whether those outcomes that I highlighted before were achieved. Here we get a mixed result. Some students are nodding. One of the things that was made clear is that students are not involved in defining these outcomes. There's never been a review of these programs, as I think one of the past speakers said. So we're really starting from scratch in terms of assessing whether these programs are meeting their outcomes. Some adults spoke highly of individual SROs and their ability to engage with students in a meaningful way. We also heard from administrators that appreciated the role of SROs as mediators. However, there's no evidence that SROs contribute to keeping students out of the criminal justice system, which is what we heard on a few occasions from police officers. And as I said, some officers do engage in a kind of discretionary decision-making around, discipline or whether or not a student should be arrested and this sort of thing. We did hear that there's times where police officers seek to avoid those kinds of outcomes for students. Many participants that we heard from, including students, thought that the presence of diverse officers was seen as a way to promote policing as a viable career. We did hear that, demonstrating that police officers can be positive role models. So, are the programs having their desired impact on students? Regarding education through the VIP program, students mostly recalled it was about drugs. I'm quoting there, which doesn't seem to align with some of those broader aims of VIP, right, around personal development and relationships, etc. Just under half of the student survey agreed that this program was valuable, with white students more likely to express value in the program, and 2S LGBTQIA plus students least likely to express value. With respect to BRAD, 34%, you'll see there's a kind of even distribution here. 34% said yes, there's value. Another third says maybe, and then slightly more than a third say no. Do students of all identities recognize and support the intended outcomes of this policing? What we found was Middle Eastern, South Asian, and white students were more likely to agree that interactions with police in schools made a positive impact on their opinion of police. Less likely to agree with this idea were Black, African, or 2S LGBTQIA plus students. On the next slide, you'll see that when asked if students would talk to an officer at school, the majority of all groups, student groups, displayed, with exception of students with disabilities, somewhat likely or very unlikely to speak with an SRO. Least likely to speak with an SRO, again, 2S LGBTQA+, 59%, South Asian students, 56%, also very unlikely. In this chart here, you'll see highlighted in response to the question, if you saw an SRO, how likely are you to speak with them? You'll see that South Asian students and 2S LGBTQIA plus students, very high here in somewhat unlikely or very unlikely. But you'll see that with the exception of students with disability, you're up and above over 50% in all categories, somewhat very unlikely. So this really goes to the core of this idea that the SROs are building relationships, are there as supporters, are there as mentors, and it does raise some questions around if students are feeling that they would be unlikely to speak with the SROs, how exactly are those relationships going to be formed? When it comes to the question of feeling safe, which is probably our most significant finding in this work, you'll see here a distribution. Do students of all identities feel safe at school in the presence of uniformed officers? We don't have a breakdown here yet on identity, but you'll see in the middle of this graph a large number of students reporting feelings of anxiousness, distractedness, as well as worry, being the significant feelings around police, uniformed police in their presence. Here we see responses to how does seeing a police officer at school make you feel. Pay attention to the green, which is somewhat unsafe. You'll see with respect to Black and African identifying students, close to 70% cite feeling somewhat unsafe. We also see South Asian students, a large number saying somewhat unsafe, as well as 2S LGBTQIA plus students. Note the differences across the groups which really speaks to lived realities and histories with police. We know that, and there's plenty of evidence on this beyond this report. We know that these groups that are reporting feeling somewhat unsafe have long histories of exclusion, discrimination, violence in policing. So we see a correspondence there. When asked, when you see an officer at school, do you avoid them? With responses being never, rarely, sometimes, often, and always. A quarter of all students would try to avoid an officer at school. And the following students are more likely to avoid, again, South Asian, 2S LGBTQIA+, and Black African identifying students. When combined with sometimes, which is not a strong sort of favorable response, you are looking at 94% of Black students and 82% of 2S LGBTQIA+ students would sometimes, often, or always avoid police in their schools. So we were really picking up on this notion of avoidance and wondering what that's about. When asked about more or less involvement with police in schools, you'll see here that 40% of all the students we spoke to said they were open to more involvement. However, the majority at 53% express, and this is across all identities, express they would like to see less and or no involvement with police. And then overwhelmingly, again, those racialized groups, as well as 2S LGBTQIA+ students, overwhelmingly saying they would like to see less or no police involvement in school. So with these findings in hand, we circled back to the board and we identified the human rights and equity principles in which the board's decisions and actions must be rooted. We heard a speaker mention these, so I won't go over them in detail, but this is a human rights issue, and there are commitments that the board is currently responsible for fulfilling that directly intersects with this work that we did to collect student and stakeholder responses with respect to police. So this is something that can't be ignored, that this work has to be seen in context in relation to these human rights obligations, as well as stated policies that the board has made. So, a number of recommendations. We made 4 in total. The first recommendation, based on the fact that a majority of racialized and marginalized students report feeling unsafe with police presence in school, we are recommending that the board should remove those engagements. The goal here is to ensure that all non-emergency police presence in schools is facilitated through an equity-focused lens that prioritizes student safety, belonging, and well-being. This means we shouldn't have police officers coming to school unannounced, uninvited, parking the cruiser in front of the school, which we heard is very, very concerning for community members, very anxiety-inducing. And rather, all of those opportunities where the board and educators decide there is a role for police to join educators in delivering topics that are relevant to law enforcement, that is when police officers would come into the school environment under a very different context than they're currently operating in schools. So you'll see here what we're trying to do is respond to the fact that we did hear from stakeholders who see relationships with the police as being valuable, as having a role, but what we're trying to achieve here is a constricting of that relationship, a constricting of that role, and most importantly, that the police involvement follows educators, follows the school in terms of deciding the content, the curriculum, where it makes sense that police participate. In line with this, and in line with recognizing that even if the school board was to develop, let's say, an initiative around a career day, I think we heard about a career day earlier, where police were invited, that may be triggering for some students. Many of the students who you saw in the findings said they feel unsafe in the presence of police officers. So with recommendation 2, what we're suggesting is that there should be a consent basis, there should be a consent process where all students have an opportunity to opt out of that content. No questions asked. They shouldn't be questioned as to why they're opting out. There should be an open and transparent opt-out process that doesn't further stigmatize those who have opted out. And that's really on the board to really think through how to design a process where a student would say, nope, I'm not comfortable with that, and exercises their right to opt out. So we've recommended an opt-out process. With respect to VIP and BRAD, what we're seeing here in recommendation 3 is that we really should change the focus here from these being police-led, and we're recommending that experts or community leaders and others who are much more well-placed to work with students who know youth development, who are experts in pedagogy, they should be the ones who are leading this curriculum. And again, where and when appropriate, inviting police to participate, as opposed to having these be police-led. And our final recommendation recognizes the fact that, and I think we heard this from police officers as well, that they're not educators, and that when they enter a school, they're entering an educative environment. And so we think it's critical that the board, in recognizing that, create some level of training, some level of competency that would say all officers coming into the school environment should have some fundamental level of understanding of what it means to have their presence in the school, particularly in uniform. They should have an awareness around the history of policing and the impacts that it has on members of the student community. They should be invited to have training in equity-focused approaches in the school environment. So again, really emphasizing that while there's an opportunity that we're hearing from stakeholders to have a relationship with the police, it has to be fundamentally different. It has to be one that is led by the community, led by educators, informed by the community, parents and students. And in turn, if the police wish to have these relationships, we see it as being completely reasonable that any officer wanting to have a positive impact when he, she, or they enters the school environment would be open to receiving such training. Okay, and that concludes my presentation. We also in the report have included some additional considerations around future ways of evaluating initiatives. So oftentimes there's a sort of stated intent around an initiative, even a career day. But when you actually evaluate it, it's not actually meeting those outcomes. So creating an evaluation culture around these programs, instead of just saying, hey, we've always done it this way, let's continue to do it, bringing that evaluation lens. We've also suggested here that there needs to be, and I think we heard this from a speaker earlier as well, there needs to be a real shift in seeing police as partners and really emphasizing the importance of having a protocol that speaks to what it means to have police inside schools at all. So if these incidents, as we've heard, are handled poorly, their impacts can be traumatic and everlasting. As a responding community partner, police have a responsibility to act within the school community in accordance with GECDSB's police role in schools protocol. So emphasizing that. And then lastly, again, re-emphasizing this idea that the board should consider how they can work with police services to prioritize the use of youth-trained officers who come to the school environment with an orientation around youth development and equity. Okay, thank you very much for your time, and I'm open to some questions.
Thank you, Mr. Price, as well, for doing all the work in your company, and for presenting that overview for us. Thank you very much. There is a recommendation, and I know that trustees want to get into questions. Trustee Leclerc, you're first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Mr. Price, full disclosure, I spent 30 years as a police officer in the city of Windsor, and my wife happens to share the same surname as you. Anyways, so I just so you understand where I'm coming from, I am a very progressive person politically, and I was a youth crime officer for many years. I spent a lot of time in high schools. So I'm old. I'm retired. This predates SROs. Okay, and I can tell you, as a youth crime officer, one of the principles of the Youth Criminal Justice Act is to ensure that young people are diverted away from the criminal justice system. And I spent an inordinate amount of time redirecting young people away from the criminal justice system to other resolutions to avoid the criminal justice system. So that's where I come from. I also taught VIP for many years, and I've had several instances over the course of the years where the most recent one was I was having Bell 5 installed in my house, and the technician showed up, and when I opened the door, he's like, "Constable Ron." Yeah, no, I'm retired Inspector Ron now, but nevertheless, he talked to me about how great VIP was. So there are plenty of examples, and that's not to diminish, but I'm just trying to give you my lens, my context. But what I really want to drill down to is the data set, because I raised this before, that I had serious concerns about the data collection, in that I actually had some people reach out to me to say that they were able to successfully submit multiple responses to your survey. There was nothing that precluded somebody, as the one person indicated to me, somebody from Russia participating in, and I know that's an extreme example, but I'm just saying, so what I'm asking about is the data set. What checks and balances were put in place to ensure that the data that was collected, particularly the 3,000 from outside the school board, because I'm not sure what value that has. The other is it fair to say that 300 students represents 2% of all of our students in high school?
So let me start with the public survey approach. So it's not uncommon to have a public survey that's open, and you know, if anyone has the intent to be malicious or mischievous, they can do it. The government has open public surveys. What we try to do, of course, is triangulate. We try to say, from a thematic analysis basis, what are the recurring themes, ideas, concerns that are emerging? So irrespective of whether you've got 1,000 people or 100 people, we're interested in something that's coming up consistently. So that's one way that you sort of get at the question of numbers. We're very open in saying that this is non-randomized. We're not pretending that this is a scientific empirical study. that's nearly impossible with this kind of subject matter. However, when you do have 300 students speaking and sharing their experience, you have to take it seriously. It's still data, it's still storytelling. And as I said, when you start to see recurring patterns in what we're gathering from that large number of people, you begin to feel confident that you're zeroing in on shared perspectives, common experiences, etc. Your last question was with respect to, oh, right. So again, not a randomized study, but not insignificant to have an opportunity to hear from 300 students.
So I do appreciate that frankness. That's refreshing to hear.
It's in the report.
Yeah, no, I wanted it out there here today,
Yeah.
right? And I am in no way diminishing, and I fully acknowledge that there are marginalized people that are of color, of indigenous, or of the LGBTQ 2+ community. But what I saw in your report is opportunity rather than shutting a door completely. That's what I see, and that's why I hope to put forward the motion that is being recommended. So thank you for your time.
Okay.
I will make the motion that's written as recommended.
So I'll speak to the motion. So I'm going to be really honest. I have been involved in the VIP program just because of where I work. When I went and sat in on sessions, I thought, wow, this is pretty awesome, and some of the kids' reactions were, they loved it. Other kids kind of sat back and didn't really know what to think of it. Reading your report made me think of things that I never thought of. Think of things of what was going on with those kids. What happens to newcomers? What happens to marginalized groups? And it really started to make me think. And I talked to a couple trustees earlier this evening about the report. So I really, really appreciate the report. I will not support the recommendation as is. This recommendation reads, and other community members as deemed appropriately by the committee. To me, marginalized groups are once again an afterthought. Those marginalized groups should have been in that recommendation first. Because when you read this report, read what they're saying, read the results. And now we're saying, well, administrators, trustees, and a couple police officers are going to sit down and figure out what to do next. We're missing what we just did, the whole report. So I will not support it as is. I would do an amendment, and I'm not really quick with wording, but I would do an amendment to add in marginalized groups, like somehow to word it. If somebody else wants to take that over, go ahead. But that needs to be a first thought, not an afterthought. Thank you. I will make an amendment. Like I said, I'm not really great with the words really quick, but that the board form a committee made up of, well, you know what, I'm going to turn it over to Julia, to Trustee Burgess, who's much better at wording than I. I'm going to tell the chair.
Can I just clarify that it's not the recommendation, but the motion that's before the group? Okay, because you said recommendation in terms of the report, but it's the motion. Okay.
Correct. It's the motion. Trustee Burgess, Trustee Cook would appreciate some help with wordsmithing. I think you know what her intent is.
Okay, I'm not sure that this will fly, and I think the test will be a discussion and a vote on this amendment, but I have an amendment before me, and I want to recognize that Trustee Chin had her hand up too, so I don't want to jump the gun. So, okay, so I appreciate that. And to clarify, we have 4 recommendations from the report and 1 recommendation from, I think, senior administration. I'm not sure where the recommendation came from because it didn't come from a committee. And it
Senior
doesn't.
administration from the cover letter. We have a memo.
Correct, right.
Right?
From
Or
senior
making
administration.
A recommendation on how to proceed with
Right.
the report.
So I have an amendment on L1, the recommendation before us, and it's been moved and seconded. So the amendment would read
Sarah Godden is now exiting.
that the board form a committee made up of, but not limited to, senior administration, school administrators, 2 trustees, and I would say they need to be nominated. That's not in the motion. A minimum of 1 member of the Dismantling Anti-Black Racism Committee, and other community members and resources as deemed appropriate by the committee to review and report and consider next steps. So it's to strike the words representatives of local police forces, and I would talk to that, why I would say strike those. I would speak to that, and to add the words and a minimum of 1 member of the DABR, the Dismantling Anti-Black Racism Committee, in the place of representatives of the local police forces, and everything else would be intact in the motion as far as the amendment goes. So I can repeat it.
Okay, I'm looking for a seconder. Trustee Cook, is that what you would like to see? Okay. So on the amendment,
If I could speak first and last.
Trustee Burgess.
Thank you. I'm striking the word representatives of the local police force because we have in the motion 2 trustees, and I think there is lived experience on our board, and I would nominate 2 trustees at this place that have policing experience, either as reserve or as a police officer. And I think they would really help inform the committee by that lived experience and having school board governance duties. I'm not going to strike the other community members and, the word also and resources. I meant and resources because bringing experts into the committee, whether they need be for presenters or whatever, I want to understand that there may be some budgetary implications to that. There might be some outreach implications to that. They may not be members of the committee or non-voting, but the committee says we need these people. So that's why I added and resources as deemed appropriate. I understand the hesitation about it looking like maybe an afterthought. I'm thinking that once the work is underway, that those community members and at least a minimum of 1 Dismantling Anti-Black Racism committee member would bring that other voice that is really missing in this recommendation. This isn't only anti-Black. We saw in the report who felt safe, somewhat safe, very unsafe, etc. It's not just anti-Black, but we do know and we heard very clearly that this committee, which this board endorses and supports, was not consulted, in my opinion, adequately enough prior to this recommendation coming forward. And I think they're an essential part of the conversation on this committee. So it doesn't have to be just 1 member. It could be amongst the DABR committee. They may say, we want this member, no, we want 2. I'm saying a minimum of 1, and there might be alternates so that there's always somebody there when this committee meets. And I think that's all that I'm going to speak to as far as the amendments. Thank you.
All right, so just to be clear, there were some hands flying up before we got to the amendment. So obviously people have questions. Procedurally, we need to speak to the amendment that's on the floor. So I'm still going to go by the list, as long as you're going to ask a question about the amendment. And I have almost everybody on the list. Okay. Trustee Chin, on the amendment, if that's what your question is.
Actually, I have questions and regarding
we can go back to questions of
we
the
can go
report
back.
when we go to the main motion?
Actually, I put up my hands
I know.
very early. I think I was
know.
the first one, but I think it's important regarding the survey. If we know more
Point
about
of order.
We have
Point
to,
of order.
We have to follow the procedure
Okay,
first,
thank you.
sorry. So, and then, so what I'm doing is going through this list that everybody put their hand up, and I'm going to ask you if you want to speak to the amendment. If you're going to speak to the amendment, that's fine. If not, you're going to go back on the list later when we go back to the main motion. Trustee Buckler, you had your hand up? Not on the amendment, okay. Trustee Armstrong, nothing on the amendment. Trustee McKinley on the amendment, okay. Trustee Leclerc on the amendment, go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess there's a couple things I want to clarify. One is I have no issue when, as other community members is deemed appropriate, I assumed that, shame on me for assuming, I assumed that what we would include is members of the 4 particular areas that Mr. Price's report focused on, right? South Asian, Black, Indigenous, and LGBTQ plus. That's what I assumed we would make sure that was there. So I have no problem with that. I will say that there's no such thing in Ontario as a police force. They're police services, so that's poorly worded. But anyway, but I think local police have to be at the table if we're going to be discussing how if there's going to be any improved service delivery. Like, for example, in Mr. Price's report, he talked about certain topics might be led, it should be teacher led, but may require police support in delivering the particular topic. So if the police are going to be a stakeholder in this, they should be at the table as well. That's my opinion. So unless we can amend to put them back in, I can't support the amendment, which is difficult for me because I support the first half of it, which is about adding the specific groups.
Just on that concern, I don't know that the amendment precludes us when we get to the part about other community members that we may deem necessary to come on. So there is a loophole. I'm just putting that out there, but
As the mover, I would speak to that, but I want to do it in order.
yes.
That was not my intent. The added as a resource, yes. I just think there's an inherent conflict of interest for police to be voting on.
Yeah, that's fine.
Be voting.
But that doesn't mean that they can't be invited as a resource. Right, okay. And on
That changes my mind.
okay. So the next Trustee Sipkar on the amendment, and then
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, Trustee Burgess was probably reading my mind as I was thinking of amendment along a similar lines. However, my question, or I guess my concern, is that we do name the DABR committee, or in this case, as you've amended, but we don't name our other committees that are also under the equity umbrella. And I also think of groups like IAC. I think of other committees that are part of our board. And I think that it's wide enough at this point, but we do say community members and not other committee representation within our board structures. And I think that I think that those other groups would also feel similarly, having not been included as potential members of this committee. So I don't know if this is a friendly amendment, but all I'm suggesting is that I have concerns with only limiting it to the one committee, and I think it would be wise to have some kind of wording to make that more inclusive to the other group, equity-seeking groups within our board.
but you're not.
Well, I can't make an amendment on the amendment, so I'm just saying, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
procedurally, there can be an amendment on an amendment before the amendment is passed. So it's in order, but if I could just speak quickly to it, I'm not opposed to adding those words, but my assumption in when I say community members, a lot of the members that I'm thinking of, unlike the ethnic or things that are described only, the community members were also community members that exist within our system already and that have already made a commitment. So SEAC, IAC, GECPIC, et cetera, those are community members that make up those, administration is already on here. So that's my interpretation of who we have in-house that have already made a commitment to equity and our strategic priorities and being their voice in those specific areas. So engaged parents, Indigenous, those from amongst the special education.
Thank you. Trustee Cook.
So I hear what, through you, Madam Chair, what Trustee Leclerc said about police being on the committee. If police are sitting on the committee, we're going to have other members of our marginalized groups not feeling comfortable to be on that committee, and that's not fair. So what we need to do, in my opinion, is to have a committee and start the process, hear what they would like, what we would all like to see happen moving forward, and at an appropriate time, bring in a police officer or whatever, and share. But we have to respect, we're not going to make any progress if we have people that aren't feeling comfortable. So.
Thank you. On the amendment, Trustee McKinley.
Yeah, I don't know about anybody else, but I'm finding this all rather confusing tonight. So I'd kind of like to ask a couple questions for my own clarification before I can make a decision one way or another. Because I honestly, before I came here, did not expect this motion to morph the way it has tonight. So based on information I've heard that one of our committees was not notified about the final recommendations and or this motion before us tonight. Am I correct? Was that, are there other committees that we also did not connect with this motion before it came to us? That concerns me. So my mind wanted to refer this motion to the committees that are most affected.
So I'm just going to call point of order, because we did point of order against Trustee Chain when she was not asking a question. We are talking about the motion.
I get that, but I can't respond.
But we're talking about amendment, and Trustee Chain wanted to ask questions too.
I understand that, but I
hear you,
can't respond to the amendment.
I hear you, but we can't allow you to ask questions.
To the committee.
The amendment is with regard to the membership on the committee.
And expanding it and adding these things, other committees to it. I understand that part. I just got questions that I need to understand before I make that decision on whether or not I want to support either of these motions, quite frankly. So,
Director, did you have something you wanted to add?
Superintendent Korbach may be able to add to that, through you, Madam Chair. But this was a public report. The committees were all, their voice was in the report, but it wasn't circulated, to be clear. Though this was, their voices were in, and they were directly asked to be part of the report. But I don't know if Superintendent Korbach has any more information to add.
Thank you, Director Kelly, and through you, Madam Chair. Nothing additional. That's correct. That all of the committees that you're referencing were connected with the logical outcomes during the process, but their voice was represented in the consultation for the final report.
Thank you. Student Trustee Hawkins.
Thank you. I appreciate what Trustee Burgess has added to the amendment in order to make this a more inclusive committee, but I do think we are lacking student representation in this process. And I'd also like to note on the 300 students' responses to the survey. I do think 300, when you first look at it, can look like a very small number of students relative to the amount we have in the board. But to survey students on such a serious and reflective topic is very difficult to do. And I also think that racialized students may have been underrepresented in the surveying, especially if they have had negative experiences with police services. It could be a triggering or very emotionally draining experience to be trying to think about all of their negative past experiences and express those to an anonymous survey where there's no one to have compassion for them through a survey. There's no one to express empathy for them through a survey. So I think having student representation is, especially having marginalized students represented on this committee, is the most important aspect of it.
So I'm going to ask you, and I'm going to ask the mover of the amendment, mover and seconder, would you accept it as a friendly amendment that we add student representation?
Madam
Or
Chair,
do you want it formalized?
Yeah, Madam Chair, you know, I'm not a fan of friendly amendments. I'm a fan of this, and I'd be happy to add it in the amendment on the table. I think student voice is essential. I just want to make sure for clarification whether it's the voice of student voice representing marginalized students, or a marginalized student, or a member of Student Senate that can understand that. I want to make sure that I understand who the student trustees would prefer. I think student voice is essential. I think it's missing. So
Okay.
I accept it as a friendly amendment. I just want to know.
Okay. All right. Student trustee.
I would like there to be a general wording around having student representation, because it's important to have also student willingness to share experiences. And I think if we say directly marginalized student representative, it's forcing marginalized people to speak about traumatizing experiences. So I would like a more general wording.
To that end, I put 2 student members.
Okay.
In my writing here.
And Trustee Cook, you were the seconder of the amendment? I'm good with that. You're good? Okay. And is everyone, are there any objections to allowing that friendly amendment without having to vote on the amendment to the amendment? Okay. All right. Now, we've gone through the list of trustees who wanted to speak on the amendment. So I'm now going to call for the vote on the amendment. Trustee Burgess has the final say.
I would just like to, if I can, because I have a lot of scribbling here, just re-say it, since there's been an addition, so that we know what the amendments are. That the board form a committee made up of, but not limited to, senior administration, school administrators, 2 trustees, a minimum of 1 member of the Disabling Anti-Black Racism Committee, and other community members, including GECDSB committee members.
Now exiting.
2 student members. And other community, sorry, I got it wrong here, because I don't have a thing here. And other community members as deemed appropriate by the committee to review the report and consider next steps. I just want to make sure that everybody's in there. I got a little bit messed up there, but I didn't write it out. I'm just scribbling. Okay.
I'm going to take the vote now. All those in support of the amendment. Are there any opposed to the amendment? That carries. Thank you. So the amendment basically spelled out more specifically the membership of the committee. So now we're back to the main motion, which is that we do form a committee to examine this report, which is 80 pages long and quite full of information.
Point of order.
Back to the questions on the report.
Point of order.
Point of order.
Are we going to vote for this motion, and after that, do we still have chance to clarify the survey? I have questions I have never been asked.
Don't get upset. We just passed the amendment. Now
I don't think it's logical to rush to the motion without understanding the survey.
To admit all participants in the lobby, press star.
Now we're going to the main motion, which allows trustees to ask questions about the report, which is what you wanted.
Okay, thank you.
So the first person on that list was Trustee Chin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for the presentation. And I appreciate your endeavor, but to be honest, I questioned the quality of the survey of your research. There is systematic biases on that. And I hope you don't mind if I, speak and you can discuss with me. And the first is that the items are full of ambiguity. And like Trustee Leclerc mentioned, that the main question that you asked is, do students feel safe at school in presence of uniformed police officers? How does seeing a police officer at school make you feel? When asked, when you see an officer at school, do you avoid them? Never, rarely, or something? I question the purpose of these questions. For me, if I were asked, if I see a police in the campus, I feel, something happened. Maybe something wrong, some student bring the weapon or something. I will answer this question at absolutely not safe, because when I see the police. But it's regardless of if the police is welcome or not. I welcome the police to protect us. But before I know what happened, you ask this question, I don't know how to answer. I will answer very unsafe, but I will answer, I welcome police to be here. So this is this question is very obvious, and there is full of ambiguity. And also, I think that there is another systematic bias, is that obviously you have pre-existing position about you against the police. I can see that, because whenever you use the format like although like although there was positive feedback about the police, and there is several students have negative opinions, and you always use this kind of format. The fact is the community welcome, but you said although this and some are not satisfied. True, not everybody is satisfied with that, but to be professional consulting company, you have to stick with the fact.
I have to call a point of order. Point of order, please.
I haven't finished that. I do have
Trustee Chen, I just need you to bring that down to your question, please.
Okay, and there is sentence like students. It's too much to say. That you said not all students provided positive experiences about these programs, nor were they enthusiastic about the presence of SROs in school. Thus, this review cannot conclude that the desired impact of school-based programs is applicable for all GECDSB students. What's this logic? Obviously, no no actions, no programs will have fully 100% support. That's true, but not 100% support does not mean it failed. So I don't see there is any sense about this kind of judgment. And I have questions.
Well,
I have questions. How many South Asians in your data? I'm Asian. When I answered the questionnaire, I saw there is Asian group. And I know many Asian parents concerned about the safety of the campus. And they answered that, but we are totally ignored. And our answer is underestimated. Even I believe many people answered. I'm not sure how many South Asian answered. You just pick the person who is the most negative group, and then you represent. It's systematic bias. You selected. Okay.
Trustee Chin, just please, let me just say something. Everyone has their opinions on the report. Everyone in this room has opinions on the report. This is the opportunity, if you need to ask a question of Mr. Price, whose company presented the report. If you have a specific question, but so far you haven't brought it down yet to your question. I appreciate all your opinions, but everybody has their opinions.
Question is that can you explain all these kind of systematic bias that I pointed out, and you can I expect your response.
So thanks for the question and comments. First of all, let me just say we were very transparent in saying that this report centered the voices of marginalized students. So if that, in your view, is a bias, then we were very open about that. Because when we did the lit review, and if you're familiar with the history of policing in this country, or how schools have been sites of discrimination, exclusion, anti-Black racism, if you're aware of that history, then you will know going into a study like this the importance of centering those voices, because those are the voices that historically have been left out. And if I can just respond.
That's your pre-existing position that I mentioned.
Sure, that's your opinion. And if I can also respond to what you described as downplaying the positive. The very fact that we arrived at recommendations that are seeking to leave space for this board to figure out how to center community, center students, but leave an opportunity to have police invited in is reflective of those views of police being contributors to the community. And this report sought very hard to be responsive to those views. So I completely disagree with your framing that we emphasize only the negative in this report.
Thank you, Mr. Price. I'm just going to mention to trustees that I would like to get through this item, L1, and then I'm going to go to the timed items, and then we're going to go back to M1, just the director's report. Okay, just so you know what the game plan is. And right now I'm working on the speakers list with regard to the main motion. Next we have Trustee Buckler.
Very quick question. I spent about 5 minutes looking for your 4 recommendations in this long report that I thoroughly read. I enjoyed I think you were great. You did a fabulous job on it.
Thank you.
Do we have your 4 recommendations somewhere?
Yeah.
Yes, they're there.
I couldn't find it. We could not find it.
Page 29.
That's why we were looking at page 70. Yeah. No, that's fabulous, because I think those were the best part of. That's terrific. Thank you.
Trustee Armstrong on the main motion.
Just a couple of comments. When I read your report, I was shocked and saddened because as a teacher, in the schools where I taught, VIP was really, really loved. My kids loved it. But the fact that your report said that 3 or 4 or 5 years later they couldn't remember anything about VIP, how many parents say, well, what'd you learn in school today? Oh, I don't remember. So I can't put any emphasis or trust in that it wasn't valuable. My second question is that if, let's see, if you're talking about these kids, how do they respond to other authority figures? Because I agree with Trustee Quinn that if I were to see a police officer, I'm not going to go and talk to them. Why? Because I got a speeding ticket not so long ago. You know, I have this thing. So I'm not going to say that I can't see that that's a number one thing because I've never been, well, I do have a friend who's a police officer and she's lovely.
Right.
So anyway, but how are these kids, how do they respond to principals and people in lab coats and, you know, authority figures? Do they also have the same kind of reaction to them is my question.
Unfortunately, that wasn't in the scope of this. Those kinds of questions weren't asked. It wasn't our focus here. But I'll go back to this question of responding to police or being in the presence of police. We ask questions aligned with the kinds of program activities that police are currently engaged in, VIP, BRAD. We did not ask questions that were just sort of willy-nilly, what do you think of police? The questions were in relation to SROs, BRAD, VIP. And that is why we focused on the secondary students, because we knew that if we asked students in middle school and other grades, that they wouldn't have the lived experience. They would not have had the exposure to these programs, and we thought that would have been, that would have skewed what we learned. So we deliberately tried to find students who would have had as much exposure to these programs, and we asked questions in relation to the programs. We did not ask questions generally about your views on policing, et cetera. It was, how do you feel when you see them in the school? Do you feel safe when you see them in the school, et cetera? Would you approach them in the school? So all of our questions were within the remit of what we were asked to do. So I just want to emphasize that. Yeah.
Thank you. Trustee McKinley on the main motion.
Yeah, these 4 recommendations, excellent recommendations. I don't know how when I was doing this 133 package, I might have missed all of the details of that, but I certainly caught it in your report. And then I'm thinking, I would love, because I feel like our committees have not had the benefit of these 4 recommendations to give us input based on your recommendations, which I thought were pretty good. I thought they were very reasonable, and it definitely would be helpful to have that input as the committees as opposed to individuals, because they should be involved in this before it's coming to us to decide whether we're having this committee or not.
Just to clarify,
Yes.
they were involved in the survey. This is the voice of a lot of these groups within the report.
They were involved in the survey, but
Yes.
not in giving thoughts on the recommendations.
The recommendations were the role of the consultant. Yeah, we had an outside person.
So now that I see these, I would make a motion. Sorry, but I would make a motion to refer our motion and these recommendations to those committees that we have, the GIAD, the anti-Black racism, the IAC, and any others I may be missing because I've been gone for 4 years, so there may be some I'm not aware of. But if they are affected by this motion tonight and by the recommendations, I would love to hear some input before I make decisions on, I guess, a committee that's going to then decide whether we're doing anything about this stuff. Wouldn't the
Okay, I'm just going to wing it here,
There's
but
the
I'm
motion.
going to rule that amendment out of order. Well, we have a motion on the floor. We have a motion on the floor. So you can amend it. That's about all you can do. You can't make a motion on the motion. If the motion is defeated, you can bring forward a new motion. So I'm going to rule that we have a motion on the floor, and it is the motion on the floor is for this committee to review this report and consider the next steps, which means they may need to go to 14 different committees within the system and consult with them. It means all kinds of things, and that's exactly what this motion is trying to get at, in my opinion. So I don't see an amendment there, and a motion at this point is out of order. So, on the main motion.
To that, the motion itself doesn't say that those members would be obligated to reach out to any of those committees, that they would be making the decisions.
Well, at some point, you have to put faith in people. So the committee is to review the report and consider next steps. And
Point of order. Yeah. Previously, when we make motion, we often refer it to other committees or wait. Why we cannot do that this
We already have
time?
a motion on the floor. So you can only make a second motion if the first one is defeated. So we haven't voted yet. So now on the main motion, Trustee Sipkar.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much for this report and for the work that you did. I think it was really important to center the voice of our students, and I think that resonated and was heard loud and clear, both by this report and by the speakers tonight. Additionally, there's been some comments made around concerns around data collection, and as a researcher myself, data collection is never perfect, and there's always limitations. And actually, it was interesting to hear that there was limitations on both, or concerns around limitations around both sides. That the marginalized groups were not represented enough, or that they were overrepresented. And seeing as even a portion of our student body expressed concerns about not feeling safe in schools in direct correlation to police being there, that should give all of us enough pause to not necessarily worry about those details, but to consider what that looks like moving forward. Because it is my personal view that all of our practice should be centered in trauma-informed approaches. And I think that if we need to be taking that lens, that means all students matter, regardless if it's a certain percentage of this subsection or not. And so I think it's really important that we remember that and also work towards including more of those voices in this process. So thank you for doing that. My concern actually with the motion had to do with it reviewing and considering your recommendations that I thought were very strong. And my amendment that I'm going to put on the floor is to add that it implements those 4 recommendations on page 29. Because I think that those recommendations are extremely important, and they are centered in the voice of our students and our community. And I think they need to be implemented, and that needs to be very clearly stated, not just considering and reviewing further. And so I appreciate that there's discussion that needs to happen, which I think is part of it, but I would like to implement the 4 recommendations on page 29 as an amendment.
Okay, again, I'm not going to accept that as an amendment. And you can challenge the chair, but I'm not going to accept it because I feel it changes the intent of the motion. The motion is to review the report, which includes the recommendations, and consider next steps. That's what's on the floor. And what you are proposing as an amendment is a direct action of a committee, that the committee should take a direct action. And so I'm not going to accept that as an amendment, and your alternative would on that is to challenge the chair. But that's how I'm seeing it.
Madam Chair, is it possible for me to challenge the chair on that? Does it have to be the mover? I would challenge the chair on that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, as the mover and the mover of the amendment that has passed, I believe, really honestly, the goal of considering next steps and reviewing the report is seeing the recommendations. And I feel very strongly as well. I will speak to the main motion, but just on challenging the chair, I would say honestly that the 4 recommendations are strongly supported. So I would say that that is in order to review and report, review the report and consider next steps and implement the 4 recommendations on page 29. I find completely in order.
And I'm going to say that it binds the committee to an action.
It's not debatable.
Fine. Go ahead.
I think the next question, Madam Chair, is will the ruling of the chair be supported?
All those in support of the chair and all those.
Okay, so we know what we're doing right now. So all those in support of the chair not accepting the amendment?
What's the amendment? I'm sorry.
The amendment was to add in the 4 recommendations to the motion. To implement. So all those in favor of the chair's call not to accept the amendment? Okay, all those opposed? All right.
There's 4. Can you explain it to her?
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor, okay?
To tell the committee what.
So what's, trust?
Yes.
Okay, so all those in support of the chair, put your hands up high. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So, and all those opposed? And so it is defeated. Yep, I got it.
Back to the main motion. Am I right? Back to the amendment. No, not necessarily. No.
It's defeated. If you can't get a majority, it's defeated. It's high as a defeat. So the motion is in order. This assembly has decided the motion is in order.
No, they haven't.
I disagree.
No.
I disagree. The question is, are you in support of the chair? You challenged the chair. You were unsuccessful in getting a majority to agree.
Right.
If you don't have a majority to support the chair, the motion is defeated. Please, a parliamentarian, I ask for a parliamentarian. If it's a tie, the motion is defeated. You have to show support. It has to be in the affirmative, not a tie. It has to be in this body, since everybody's present. It would have to be 6
Rod
people.
Salvador
Mr. Price,
is
if you
now
want to
exiting.
sit down, go ahead.
I'm okay for now.
Okay.
If it goes much longer, I might take a chair. Yeah.
You're getting a chair.
So, as the one who took that vote, I'm going to have to agree with Trustee Burgess, because when we're even voting on motions, etc., if it's not a clear majority, then it is defeated.
Madam Vice Chair, it's not me. It's the Roberts Rules of Order,
I
12th
understand
edition.
that.
It's not me.
It's defeated. What happens is that it was presented. Who is supporting the chair? Okay.
I want your recommendation.
Thank you.
Point of order, can I ask? We do want to review the report. Now we are supporting all their suggestions. So is that contradictory?
That was my ruling. My ruling was
Rod Salvador
based on that.
is now joining.
So my ruling was no, a majority in the negative. No, No.
A
No.
majority in the negative is required to reverse the chair's decision. So what the majority in the negative to reverse the chair's decision, you needed 6.
Correct. Yes. Yes. Correct. Right.
Okay, so as I was the one taking that, and I just saw what Robert's rules say, it's defeated. We are moving on. We are following what the chair says. So we are not adding any amendment. We are moving on with the motion. As is.
Okay, on the main motion, is there anyone, is that you? No, okay. There are no more speakers on the main motion. Oh, no more questions. Trustee Burgess and then Trustee Chin. Questions for the presenter on the main motion?
It's not questions, it's debate and discussion on a motion that's on the floor, and I'll give that debate and discussion about the motion on the floor. We're not at trustee question period, nor are we at presentation. I want to thank the presenter for the depth of the report and discussing its limitations and what we found about it. I wish I could say I was surprised. I'm not, but I was really glad that I saw the response that you gave, and I thank that. Thank you for that. I want to say too that that in my opinion, looking at it, I haven't had the same lived experience. So, you know, I'm a white cisgendered heterosexual married woman that, you know, hasn't had much police interaction, but I have had a child in the system. I was active on school council. I have been a trustee for 22 years. I have observed things, and I know that this is timely, overdue, and really appreciated. During the pandemic, we couldn't meet as a regular board in a regular way. And even on our provincial association, we couldn't take advantage of professional development in the same way. But some things were made available to us that really helped open my eyes. And following up with that, I did engage at the very beginning of the pandemic, so I'm going to say it's going to be 2020, in a book study with Robin Maynard, directly, the author, with us, in Policing Black Lives, and it went over quite a few weeks. It was like a book club. And I want to say that it was very richly researched. The documentation there, I saw it as very reflective of the diversity in our area, and certainly there's always been this criticism, we're not Toronto. Well, we have very similar, you know, demographics and similar multi-generational stories. So I really accept that. I also was involved with the consultation with, I don't know his honorific, Michael Tulloch. Justice, thank you very much. Justice Tulloch, in his consultation about carding, and that was a few years ago prior to the pandemic, and when local consultations, he came to Windsor as one of the stops, and very
Madam Chair, is there a question?
There's not a question, it's a discussion and debate because there's a motion on the floor. It's not about questions. It's not about questions of the presenter. There's a motion on the floor. I'm debating it with my colleagues. Yes, so I just want to suggest that that's where I'm coming from, so that in supporting this motion as amended, and I'm sad that we're not going to make a full commitment to implementing the recommendations. But what I wanted to say was, I think that with the amendment, we're going to get to the actual work that we need to do, because I think the committee is going to have the right membership. I think that we have system support in. We've already heard them. GECPIC, which is our parent involvement, IAC, which is the Indigenous, the Justice in Inclusion, Equity, and Diversity Committee, SEAC, which is Special Education Advisory. These are system resources. It's embedded in the motion. I think having student representation and eliminating the actual police presence except by as an invited guest, an invited non-voting guest. That eliminates the inherent conflict of interest that police on the committee would have, I believe. So I support the motion really, really fully, and thank you for the work in doing it. I would strongly suggest, as I really would like to, after if it's supported, the main motion and the amendment has been so. I would strongly suggest that again we would nominate the two trustees that we see as the best support, and not just merely two people to put their hands up that they want to be on there. I really think that the lived experience in policing is valuable. So I'm supporting it without that caveat, but I have in mind the two trustees that have lived experience in working in policing, and I would hope that they would accept a nomination to be on that committee. That's all I have to say. Thanks very much for all your work.
Thank you.
Trustee Chin, do you have questions of the report of on the main motion?
Oh, yes. Please don't mind my previous comments. And because actually, I also want to introduce my background. I'm a PhD candidate, and my major is manufacturing management. And my research do a lot of survey, so I know how a professional survey would be like, and how the systematic bias would be like. So I hope you don't mind. And I suggest that as a consultation company, we should always, forget about our position and express the fact, the data, outside. And what's the 3,000 community response is, and not only choose the one that are against it. And you should always remember that most of the respondents their response should be respected, and even if it's not what you like or prefer. So actually I have suggestion to our trustee group. I want to question the quality of the of the survey, of the research, and I do want us to take, to be more careful when we make any decision based on the research, which is not, we don't have much confidence on that.
Point of order, Madam Chair. Let's ask, either there's a question or...
She's allowed to make her comment just as the previous trustee did.
Yeah, I welcome his response.
Yeah, I disagree profoundly with how you're framing this. I don't think that comes as a surprise, but I'm also not here to get into methodological debates. I think what my group has done is a fair, reasonable job in terms of speaking to, it wasn't just the survey, by the way. You've completely ignored the fact that we did in-depth interviews, that we did focus groups with students, that we did a lit survey. You've completely ignored that, and you've just focused in on the survey, which I think does a disservice to what's collected in this report. But I think someone said it really strongly previously. You've got a report that captures the experiences of your students. It's on you to accept that. It's on you to see that as valuable information. It's not about my bias. It's not about what we chose to put in or put out. I stand by this report. I feel it's a reasonable, fair report. I do not think that we overemphasized anything. I think what we did is we were very clear about who historically has been left out in such processes like this, whose voices need to be heard, and we did that.
Thank you.
That's what I said. You pre-existed,
No.
standard.
Okay, thank you.
And I have a question. What's the evaluation?
Sorry, we have to go to the next, and then Trustee Nelson for the first time.
Yes, thank you through you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say thank you. This is a very appreciated factual data collection. As somebody who has lived experience, this resonates with me. And when you have students in the system who are fearing and experiencing anxiety and are distracted by certain presences, I think it'd be a disjustice and a disservice to our students and our staff to ignore the facts and the outcomes of this data collection piece. And so my question is, when you have groups like the Dismantling Anti-Black Racism who are part of our community, as well some of them are parents of students within our system, how valuable is it to have those members at the table reviewing the documentation, reviewing the results and the outcomes of your data collection? And I guess how influential should that be on our decisions moving forward, if you could?
Thank you for the question. It's absolutely critical. I have to be honest, I was unaware that we had a motion on the table. We delivered the report, and I was prepared to speak to the report, but I have to be completely candid. I did not know that a step had been taken to move to a decision around a composition of a committee, who was on it, et cetera. So we were not, or I was not privy to those decisions. But absolutely, in terms of our process and in terms of our principles, we absolutely believe that the data that you take from participants who willingly come forward, bravely come forward and share, absolutely there should be an element of return. There should at very least be a consultation around the report. How the board chooses to do that, again, is not our purview, but I completely support any opportunity for community to see the report, have discussions about the report, and to inform any future decisions around implementation. I think it's critical.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm just going to make a quick comment, then I'm going to call the vote. I've given an hour and a half to this, and so has Mr. Price. And I think that our recommendation that we're going to be voting on in a few seconds is a very responsible way to move this forward. It is an extensive report, and I think there are many people that need to be consulted and involved in how we move this forward. And I think that this motion accomplishes that, as opposed to trustees trying to hammer it out for another 3 hours on what we're going to do. And I think that it's important that we do that process in reviewing the report. I think it's the most responsible way of handling this report and considering our next steps. So I hope that trustees will support the motion, and so that we can get busy and do the work that's needed to be done. Thank you.
I have a point of order. I have a
Sorry.
question I haven't asked yet. You said
we're way over time, so we need to move on. Sorry. You can submit your questions to administration anytime, and they can submit them to Mr. Price.
Can we have a recorded vote, please?
I'm going to ask for the vote. All those in support, and I'm going to go around the room. Trustee Cook.
Support.
Trustee Leclerc.
Support.
Trustee Nelson. Trustee Sipkar.
Support.
Trustee Chin. Opposed. Are student trustees as well? Yes.
I support.
Thank you. Okay.
Support.
Okay. Trustee Burgess.
Support.
Trustee Armstrong.
Support.
Trustee McKinley. Trustee Buckler.
Support.
I support. That motion's carried. Thank you
Thank you
very
so much. Thanks for
Thank you.
your time.
Thank you.